Thank you all. So, would love to get a little bit into the implications of this work for others on a few different dimensions. I guess to start with, I think the importance of the topics you all are investigating is probably implicitly clear to everybody, but would love to hear more about kind of your motivations for seeking to explore these areas in particular as opposed to the many other things I'm sure you've thought about and considered. Would love to hear that, more information from all of you on that front.
Well, as Garrett's senior co-author, I can comment a little bit on that. I actually have always been interested in measuring the effects of advertising, and I spent a bunch of time, in fact, I spent 2 years when I was a PhD student collecting a data set on advertising and marketing variables and trying to model how does that affect sales. And I came to the conclusion at the end of those 2 years of collecting data that my data could not answer any of the questions I was interested in. And I turned to becoming an experimentalist. And because I couldn't at the time figure out how to do any advertising experiments, I went and learned about auction theory and started running my own online auctions in 1994, varying the rules of the auction so I could do tests of auction theory. 10 years later, almost 15 years later, when I got a phone call from Yahoo Research asking if I'd be interested in coming to being recruited at Yahoo Research, I thought, well, now maybe I can finally study advertising. And so that's for me it was a long story, and it's just been such a delight to be able to do these experiments with matched data on millions of people, and such a disappointment to find out that the statistical power is, it never occurred to me to do statistical power calculations beforehand because a million seemed like such a huge data set. And as Garrett explained, it's actually not all that big whenever what you're looking for is a needle in a haystack. When the variance in sales in our case is something like the standard deviation of sales, for those whom that's meaningful, the standard deviation is like 15 times the mean. And so if you're looking for a 5% increase in the mean against a standard deviation of 15, you really need to crank up sample size a lot. And it turns out with a couple million people, we're finally at the frontier where we can say, yes, that's statistically significant. Other answers?
Yeah, so my motivation is more, I'm an assistant professor in the IS area, and I kind of struggle with why is IS important to the firms. And I've done a bunch of studies where I ran quasi-natural experiments in a different setup. So I find that IT and visualization is an emerging field, and one of the ways in which IT is transforming the way products are advertised is definitely product video. So that is how I was lucky that the firm was ready to experiment, because not many firms would be willing to do this kind of an experiment that I could do with them. And perhaps one of the reasons was that maybe product videos are very costless to put. So unless until you are going for a celebrity like Kim Kardashian, you're really not shelling out a lot of money in creating product videos. So I'm very excited about it. And in fact, in line with this, I have a set of things that I'm asking the firms to do. And hope that they will see the value in it.
Unless there are any other thoughts on that theme of kind of test design and getting this done. We talked about statistical power and being planful in that regard, so we're not disappointed after we go and take the action. What guidelines would you highlight for kind of success in test design for the group to kind of take away and apply in their own environments?
I can speak to, excuse me, I can speak to a couple of points along those lines. It seems rather straightforward to think that you would evaluate when you set up your experiment or your test, who is going to be impacted and what outcomes are going to be impacted and where might the effects be greatest. It seems like that's a very natural starting point when you design your experiment in the first place. And then when you start setting up your data collection, you would want to focus on collecting pieces of information that will allow you to filter out as much as possible wherever the noise is coming. As Garrett pointed out, one thing you can think about doing is collecting time-stamped based sales as well as time-stamped exposure. You can then filter before and after in ways where you would expect to find the strongest effects. There are other ways of approaching that. Perhaps there are, in the online space, sometimes you can actually you can actually measure exactly how long an exposure was. For example, how long did somebody actually see it on the page? Did it actually show up on the page? These types of exceedingly granular pieces of information can actually change the cost of your experiment as well as the insights gained from it by perhaps as much as an order of magnitude. So we can think about running an experiment with 1 million people. You might be able to get it down to 100,000 and still have the same informational insights, meaning the confidence intervals will be just as large.
I was just going to say, making sure that the control groups that you create can answer the client's questions. We get clients who want to answer 15 questions with one experiment, and there's just no way to do that with good control groups. You just can't make enough cells. So it's making sure that the control groups will answer the questions, and then also getting the client to scale down their number of questions.
Mm-hmm. If I may add a couple points. Two points. The first thing is that if you're going to run an experiment on an ad, please, please, please pre-test your creative. Go to Mechanical Turk, do something, get some sort of focus group to say, we think this ad is 5 out of 5 or 1 out of 5. Because I've spent a lot of hours of my life analyzing the effectiveness of ads that sucked. And surprisingly, we found no effect. So do that ahead of time, please. The second thing you might want to be careful about is, well, everything. Advertising experiments seem deceptively simple. You just divide like 1 million people in half. You show one people one thing and the other people the other thing. You have to be really careful about every step of this process. Make sure the randomization is good. Check the outcome variables before treatment to make sure the randomization is proper. One thing we had is that we matched retailer to Yahoo IDs. And there's a multiple match problem where there's multiple retailers matched to a single Yahoo ID. Well, we accidentally gave people both the treatment effect, or treatment group, and the control effect. So these people we just had to throw out. These are the sort of mistakes that can happen when you're not really, really careful with every step of this process.
Yeah, you also see sometimes people messing up their randomization. Like, what we intend to do is generate a random number for each person in the list, and then kind of sort on the random numbers so that you get you randomly split people, and the top group is going to be treatment and the bottom group is going to be control. Sometimes you see people, accidentally alphabetize things before, and if you sort of alphabetize by state, then you end up with, only people in certain states being in your treatment group when you meant to randomize within each state. So that's another problem. I'd also like to mention another thing about advertising tests that I've learned from Randall. And as we've started to look at the effects of frequency, and not just this paper that Garrett presented, but also another paper Randall has presented, we're starting to believe that it may be a general property that the effects of online advertising, kind of online display ads, are approximately linear for a pretty long time. That 50 was a lot more than most people expected. And if that's the case, then it could be a really good idea to have your treatment group to just advertise the heck out of them. You don't. It turns out that frequency may be just as valuable to you as reach in those situations. And what that means for an experiment, when that's true, is you're more likely to detect the signal whenever you do a huge treatment to a small number of people than when you do a diffuse treatment to a large number of people, because the signal to noise ratio is so low, and you're only getting benefits of going to additional people that increase with the square root of n, and the benefits if the benefits increase linearly with n, the way we seem to be showing, then you may be better off doing a concentrated test on a small group of people.
Kind of along the lines of test design. Sorry, Anuj.
Yeah, so a few things. So in this experiment, I found that it's very useful to first go and just talk to the target customers. I talked to a lot of girls in my business school saying that, oh, what do you see in product video? If I show you a product video, does it sway your decision this way or that way? And so the basic idea is you have to understand what is the data generating process. Experiment comes next. First, you have to have a basic idea as to, should it, affect it, and in what way should it affect? And I mean, I felt that it's very useful if you talk to the target customers or the customers how they perceive product videos. And then I have cut down a lot of things even during the implementation of product videos or these kind of an experiment. You'll find there are a lot of so look at the creation of product videos. I mean, like, should the heterogeneity in the product videos be introduced, or you should only like that only the product attributes are generating the heterogeneity in product videos and not the different models. So we tried to look at very similar kind of models in the similar background settings. So there's nothing other than products inside the product video which are different. Then there are a lot of things like, say, a thing gets stocked out during the middle of your study period. Then how should you treat it? Is it a truncation problem, or is it systematic, and should you? So what I'm trying to say is that even though you do the randomization, it's not the solution for everything. So in our case, like, firm is still doing the promotion, and promotion is done very strategically. So if you look at the kind of an experiment that we are running, maybe there's something, a firm is selectively deciding which product to put on a website homepage or a website category main page. So there's still endogeneity involved into it. So the basic idea is when you're doing a treatment and control group, you have reasons to believe that this is going to be similar in the treatment and control, and when you do the difference in difference, it's going to be weeded out. So I mean, I felt that there are lots of things which come as you go on. Say, for example, in the 28 weeks period, we kept on discovering new things and kept on thinking as to how to statistically address them.
So I think that brings up an interesting point, which is there are lots of ways to design an experiment, and so I believe Anuj, you had what was feasible to do there was to experiment at the product level, right? You could get around this problem of the firm doing promotion on one product that you couldn't anticipate if you were able to randomize at the individual customer level, right? If some customers were seeing that video for that product and others were not seeing the video for that product, that would wipe out any of these problems that get thrown at you by the firm. The problem is it's, you did what was feasible to do. It takes more engineering to split the traffic and get this customers into treatment versus control. But when you can do it, it's great because you know that all consumers are getting the exact same experience except for this one thing that you're changing. And that's what's really beautiful when you can do an experiment at that level.
That definitely touches on it. I was very interested in the concept of product comparisons. It certainly felt like you were constrained in that regard. Anuj, could you talk a bit more on that? I know you provided some color, but maybe make clear to the audience why that was necessary, and also describe the maybe challenges encountered and how you mitigated or even overcame them.
So another small thing, so if you look at the product placement on a website, you will find that, say, there are something like 10 pages on which different tops are put on the website. So now you have to be clear as to, the products for which you are introducing the videos, they have to have equal likelihood of being, on one of the pages. And so this was something which, again, so you have to tell the company that, okay, fine, please don't do it. Don't put all the product video on the front page of your all the products for which you are introducing the product video on the front page of the category, because then the products for which no video has been introduced are being relegated to the back pages, which consumers don't go usually. So these are the kind of things that I faced. So even though you randomize the products, you have to make sure that after that randomization, the firm doesn't selectively start putting it up. So they were very keen on doing, say, can we put at the category page that the video has been introduced for this product, some kind of an icon, so that a consumer, while just going on a product page or a category page, knows that, for these products, the product videos are there. Then again, it kind of sways, the sales in the favor of that. So, you have to argue with the firm and exactly tell them that, look here, you're running an experiment to understand something. Once you have understood that, okay, if I bundle the unpopular product with a popular product, unpopular product sales could increase. And that's a very, useful insight for the managers. Once you have understood it by the randomized experiment, then you go ahead and do that.
The basic idea of getting this knowledge from the randomized experiment is so that you can subsequently use it more strategically. But if you do it strategically in the first place, then whatever result that you are getting is just a very confounding result. You do not know what it is leading. I mean, where is the effect coming from? So I could, reason it out with them, and I mean, I felt that they were very receptive to this idea, and that was a very good thing. I mean,
Any other observations on kind of the operational constraints? I mean, testing often encounters operational constraints.
Yeah. So Anuj has mentioned some of the challenges that come with interacting with individuals in the firm and the decision making that happens, and there are always those types of confounds. I'd also like to speak to those can introduce biases that could either go up or down depending on how those manipulations end up happening. One reason why those things aside, one reason why I really like experiments is that almost every single technical manipulation that ends up sort of being problematic in any of the data joining process or the execution process, as long as it doesn't confound differentially across the test and the control group, it'll almost always result in attenuation bias, meaning you will detect smaller effects when you finally do the analysis than are actually occurring. So some intuition behind this is that suppose that the effects of the advertising continue longer, or suppose that you miss cash transactions because you can't attribute them to a specific customer because they didn't give you their identity. Or perhaps in the data joining process, we have this multiple matching problem, and we don't know whether we're joining, we know that there are perhaps two customers that actually match to one person being viewed. We're not able to necessarily join together all of their cells. There's so many of these little steps, and each one of these steps, we've just done some back of the envelope calculations for this particular retailer, and we think we lose about 10% here, 10% there, 10% at another step. There's sort of 3 or 4 different steps as we go from taking the customer ID, which has been attributed to the specific sales and transactions that each person did at the retailer, all the way through the third-party data joiner, all the way to finally the ad exposure, and to the extent that even people share email addresses, we don't know whether it was the husband or the wife that was seeing the ad. Like, there's just so many situations where attenuation bias can come rolling down the tracks, and when you finally get your estimate and you see that it's statistically significant, you can actually be way more confident about the economic impact. And so it's really interesting to think, to try to do some back of the envelope calculations, and where you can try to pin down specific numbers on each of these ways where experiments can go wrong. The biggest advantage of all of this is that you know that when you finally see that last answer, the answer that Garrett's presented, for example, with the frequency effects of 4 cents or 4 to 6 cents, or the average per person effects of about 48 cents, we know that those are lower bounds. Those are statistically estimated lower bounds, and all of the other effects could be much larger once we sort of scale them up to account for these measurable and knowable, or at least back of the envelopeable calculations that hopefully you would want to take into account. If we don't run an experiment, sometimes we can push aside some of these biases. We know that they're not there, but sometimes we can't necessarily sign many of the other selection bias problems that can emerge. So experiments give a really solid lower bound, but there are many technical difficulties on the data side as well as on the implementation side.
I would summarize that by saying, in an experiment, almost anything that goes wrong with your data, as long as you got the randomization right, and you're like, an even worse example than my previous one is, somebody goes and sorts the customers based on their past sales, right? And now you've got all the people with low purchases in the control group and all the people with high purchases in the treatment group, right? And so you're really gonna overestimate there. But barring that, if you actually got randomization, anything that happens in an experiment, anything that goes wrong is likely to cause you to underestimate the effects, right? You accidentally get some treatment people in the control group and so on, just like Randall was talking about. I wanted to give my favorite example of where one can go wrong with observational data. So a couple of friends of mine were trying to persuade a major retailer to help them estimate the effects of their TV advertising on their purchases, and they said, oh, no problem, we don't really need your help because we already have an estimate from our media mix model. And they said, well, the important question to ask here is, how did your advertising vary? right? Because sometimes a model can give you the wrong answer with observational data, depending on how the advertising varied. And they say, well, what do you mean vary the advertising? Well, did you advertise in different regions differently, or did you advertise different time periods differently? Where did the variation come from that lets you identify this? And they're like, we never vary our advertising. And my friend said, well, okay, so now what your model is doing is you're plotting sales versus advertising, and you're getting 1 point. And you're asking your computer to tell you what's the slope of the line through that 1 point. Right? I can give you a whole lot of different slopes. In fact, your computer should be barfing at you and telling you, sorry, I can't invert a singular matrix. I cannot tell you the slope of this line through a single point. And they said, oh, okay, yes, we do always advertise more in December than we do the rest of the year. Right? And so they sort of didn't realize that their model was implicitly assuming that they would have had the same sales in December as in the rest of the year, except for the fact that they advertised more in December. And then, any increase in sales must have been attributable to the advertising. When you finally phrase it like that, you can see that the observational study would be causing you to way overestimate, and what you really needed there was a control group that would tell you the counterfactual, how much would people have bought if they hadn't been advertised to, right? And so that's where what we're going for with an experiment.
So we have about 2 minutes before open Q&A from you all. I do have one final question. It's kind of been a little bit of an undercurrent on this topic, but to what degree do you view your findings as extensible, both within the organizations that the test occurred in and for organizations in this room and outside this room? To what degree do you kind of actually view these findings as sort of, well, we can lift them and apply these lessons in other instances?
I'll take that, just because they're on the academic experimental side, and what I would say is everything that they've talked about here, I see on a daily basis in the business side with our clients. Things like what Anuj was talking about with the popular and unpopular products, we would refer to as a halo effect. If someone's advertising Honey Nut Cheerios, how does that affect regular Cheerios or Apple Cinnamon Cheerios or whatever? And a lot of the other topics that they've covered are all things that I see on a regular basis with all of the CPG clients and a lot of the apparel retailer clients. So I think what I've seen is very, very extensible to what I do on a daily basis.
Yeah, so so the direction of the results are going to stay same, but if you say the magnitude of the result, if you go from fashion apparels to, say, for example, travel and hotel industries product video, I wouldn't be surprised if the magnitudes are a little different here and there. So that is something is my 2-bit on this.
So I wanted to add in my presentation, I talked about how recency and loyalty and all these variables seem to matter. But you want to be careful there because it's the same problem that Data alluded to, which is drawing a line through 1 point. I think we would need more experiments to be more conclusive about that. That being said, we have run several experiments where we were able to look at proximity to the retailer. And we do seem to recurringly find that consumers that live within a mile or two of the retailer account for a large part of the effect of advertising. And that result was so convincing that actually Yahoo created a product based on that called Proximity Match, where you as advertisers can purchase the consumers that live within a certain mile radius of your store.
I would also like to speak to the frequency result. I focused a lot on estimating the returns to frequency in a variety of online outcomes. My dissertation focused on this, specifically looking at clicks. I've also looked at online search propensity, and we've looked at sales and looked at online signups for a variety of firms. And we see this recurring theme that for many large advertisers for which there is wide brand awareness, where essentially the advertising is not telling them that, oh, this advertiser or this firm or this company exists, you should buy something from them. It's more of, it seems to be serving more of a reminder purpose. We keep seeing these constant returns to scale where we can show up to 40 or 50 ads over the course of ranging from a day to 2 weeks. And we see very similar effects. It just seems that online display advertising does not have diminishing returns anywhere near what we might have hypothesized. And it doesn't matter whether it's sales, as we've shown in this paper, or whether it's clicks or searches. We just see interest and response to the advertising appears to have this constant returns to scale property.
And one thing I would say is if you would combine your second and your third question, so it's the ad frequency by customer subpopulations. That's kind of where we do a lot of work around that. And Facebook presented at the ARF in March different return curves for different brand loyalists versus brand switchers and so forth. And you see some very interesting differences between what is, you had 50-ish, now that's the average customer, but what is it for different subpopulations? I think that's something that's very interesting for the advertiser to understand so that they can then optimize for future and say, oh, well, for this customer type, I only need to hit them this many times, or for this customer type, I hit them more.
Have you learned anything generalizable about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I deal a lot with CPG companies, so we're looking at brand loyalists versus brand switchers versus people who are new to the category. And what you'll find is your brand loyals, as you would expect, don't need as much frequency because they're already very familiar with the product versus someone who's not even purchased in the category. It takes a lot more to push them to it.
I would say, having seen all of Randall's work with different advertisers, I'm convinced that that the effects of frequency, on average, exhibit constant returns for a long time. I would be cautious to extend that to other kinds of advertising. Like it seems entirely plausible to me that in TV advertising, the videos get noticed a lot more because there's so much more in your face than an online display ad is, and so. It could be that what's going on is we have to show you the ad 50 times in order for you to notice it once or twice, and so I'd be cautious about extending it to video advertising.
I would also just want to address one caveat worth noting is that there's a large difference between marginal returns and average returns. In that, with many of the advertisers, when it was something new being presented, we definitely saw decreasing returns to scale, meaning that there was some form of wear out or reduced marginal impact. But it raises the question: just because the impact decreases doesn't necessarily mean that you should stop advertising after a certain period. It could be that your best customers, yes, you may see some sort of wear out over the first 10 or 15 or 20 impressions. But if they're your best customers, the advertising may actually be having the highest marginal effect still. So even though it looks like the effect is wearing out, that doesn't mean you should stop advertising if the marginal return still is exceeding the marginal cost of advertising to that segment.
Great. Thank you all. Let's reserve 3 to 4 minutes for you all to talk as tables, come up with some questions. And then I'll look for volunteer tables, and then just, oh, wow. Yes.
Well, maybe I should hold this off a little later, but the finding of what brand loyals is the expenders getting a bigger effect. Is it possible that you're confounding that with other ads that these guys are getting from the retailer, from the company?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the comment about control groups. If you can create a really tight control group, and you can kind of get rid of the noise and the confounding, then you have a lot more confidence that it's correct. What we typically do at dunnhumby is, for every exposed household, we find an unexposed household that matches them on about 10 different factors, or up to 10 different factors. And so you'll have a completely balanced control group that's almost identical in the things that you can control for. There's always some things that you can't control for, and that kind of goes back to the relative measure of if the uplift is however many cents per household, that's a good range, but it may be higher, it may be a little bit lower. You can't control for everything.
In the case of what Garrett presented, we weren't finding specific matches for households, but in our case, we have so many households. I mean, when he's showing you that the loyal customers seem to be getting a bigger bang than the less loyal customers, I mean, that's based on tens of thousands of customers of each type that are, were randomized so that they were drawn from the same population. It should be essentially an identical group of tens of thousands of people. So that shouldn't be a confound when we run the experiment like that.
This is great.
Yep.
Sounds like there's no lack of questions.
I hope I'm right, it's tens of thousands. That's my guess. Maybe it's hundreds.
Gun, G-U-N, Johnson.
Rochester. Oh yeah, I gave.
They're not going to just read it in the bio? I thought that was what the printed bios were for.
We just jumped in with answers. We've been working with Gunn and trying to figure out ways that we can combine Dunnhumby.
Well, he did say that he was from Dunnhumby at the beginning, but he didn't give an extended bio.
In fact, I just had a call a couple days ago with Michael Hopkins. Do you know him? He's in business development.
All right, guys. So looking forward to your questions. We have about 20 minutes, so let's make good use of it. Before that, let me undo my logistical failing and by not attaching names to these individuals. If you guys want to just, those of you who didn't present perhaps, go down and introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'm David Reiley. At Google, I spent the last 5 years, I'm new to Google. I spent the previous 5 years at Yahoo Research, and before that I was a professor at the University of Arizona.
I'm Justin Petty with Dunnhumby on the global partnerships team, and basically we're looking for ways to tie our data and analytics expertise with other companies' data technology to do these kinds of things, advertising effectiveness.
And I'm Randall Lewis. I've been working with David for the last 5 years. I finished my PhD in economics at MIT while working at Yahoo and doing this research. This was going to be part of my dissertation, but I fortunately found some other projects to finish it even faster, so that was nice.
Great. And you know Garrett and Anuj. Questions? Feels like there are a lot. Who's good? Yes. Up here up front. Are we waiting for mics?
Up here in front.
Right here. Yes, sorry.
She's bringing you a mic. We were helping her find you.
Okay. Oh, kind of general question maybe to two presenters, which is, how did you exactly measure final results of advertising sales? Because everything was online, but did you measure only direct online response, or you somehow included what happened also offline? And even if, okay, so this is actually the question, because it always bothers me.
So I can speak to that in two ways. First, sometimes you miss things. So in this particular retailer, the money for the advertising actually came through what they call a co-op, where the money was coming from the actual brand. What would you call that?
Co-branded
It's a co-branded campaign.
The line of goods.
And so it was coming from the line of goods, from the actual maker. So when I advertise a branded purse, maybe that purse is sold at many outlets, and so the advertiser who's actually footing the bill probably doesn't care whether it was sold at our retailer that we tracked or if it was sold at some other retailer. So we're going to miss some of these other sales that either the advertiser is going to care about, the person footing the bill, even if it's not our retailer's brand.
Randall, before you go into this,
I'm done with that.
Oh, you're done with that.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
But
and then
I think he's asking the more basic logistical question: how did you get the offline
Yeah.
sales?
And so we have both the online and offline sales for this retailer, and the way that we have that is because the retailer is very meticulous about their customer records, ensuring that they have both online and offline sales. And so we use a third party to actually join the customer identifiers in for the retailer to a Yahoo email account, essentially. And then when we've done that join, give it its whatever level of accuracy that you think it might have, we're then able to track both the online and offline purchases through that retailer for those customers that we can show the advertising.
The matching was, does this person in the retailer database have the same name and the same address as the person in the Yahoo database, the same name and maybe email address? It's that kind of personal identifying information. We say, is there a match? Yes, must be the same person. If they then show up at the store and use their credit card, we know that they made a purchase. And it's this offline purchase.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
It-
except to the extent that Randall's talking about, sometimes you mismatch things, or somebody pays with cash and doesn't tell the retailer what their phone number is or whatever.
Or yeah,
You
I
might
was
miss
gonna
some
say,
of
like at Dunnhumby, we work with retailers that use loyalty programs to capture that data. So a loyalty card, you swipe it, and so that basket's now tied to that loyalty card, which is tied to a customer, which you then combine with the online cookie to track.
Our retailer thinks that they correctly attribute 90% of sales to the right person, to the right individual.
Anuj, I know you had multiple channels. that you were
Yeah, so
doing.
in our case, it was not a problem because they have different lines of product for offline and online. And there was a very minimal, say 4 or 5 products overlap which we could get rid of. But although, having said that, it's all the more interesting if I can run an experiment where I see the spillover effect from one channel over others. The information gathered from one channel and how it spills over to the sales on another channel. That would be a much more interesting thing to work on.
So, great presentation is a great way to start the conference. I have a question that really related to both of the presentations and may be more pervasive to other discussions we're going to have throughout the day. Given that we're talking about advertising effectiveness, actually, Garrett, you started it off and you said, yes, it does work, and you have the measure. And I was really curious about the dependent measure. And I'm really thinking about, do we want to look at sales and sales only? Traditionally, advertising has been sort of forced to look at other dimensions, and I believe that sales is eventually where we want to go. But in both cases, we were looking at what was the lift that happened from that advertising with respect to sales. I'm curious about awareness. I'm curious about retention. I'm curious about long-term sales per se, any residual brand equity, et cetera. And the question is really one of what should be our dependent variable. And I'd be curious about your reactions to that question.
I guess my personal view is that the sales outcome is the gold standard, right? I mean, we're putting dollars in, we want to get dollars out. So I think the derivative measurements are just that, right? Like, it would be nice to have information about searches and brand equity and these sort of things, but I think they're usually done in place because we don't have the sales data. I mean, they can be helpful, and certainly getting that sales data is really hard and can be very expensive, so it's better than nothing, but it is derivative. And in terms of long-term sales, I just wanted to say that the signal-to-noise problem is really acute when we look at long-term sales. So we can measure within those 2 weeks of the advertising a statistically significant impact of advertising. But as you might imagine, that effect decays across time. And as that decays more and more, we have less statistical power, and so confidence intervals just blow up. We have no idea. We just can't detect anything. So that's definitely a challenge of experiments.
So I just have one additional point, is that in many online experimentation environments, it's very common to be concerned about long-term effects, because sometimes there's a term for it, but I don't remember exactly what it is. It's immediately following some sort of intervention. Sometimes there will be a spike in activity because people notice it, or there might be sort of short-term effects which actually cannibalize on the long-term effects. And so that is one caveat. I think you bring up a good point that we are very interested in the long-term effects, but as Garrett pointed out, it is actually much harder to measure the long-term effects than it is to measure the short-run effects. So as we engage in advertising, we want to make sure that we're not just doing flash in the pan, sort of capturing some sales today while robbing more significant effects from the future.
Garrett didn't have time to show this, but we do actually have data not only on the 2 weeks where the campaign was running, but the 2 weeks afterwards. And if you look at the 2 weeks afterwards, there's no, like, you might have worried about this intertemporal substitution that we're just stealing from the future, but you can see in the data that that's not the case. The treatment group's still buying a little bit more than the control group, even in the 2 weeks after. Now, I don't know if you want to call 4 weeks long run, but if that satisfies you, we at least know that much.
So I was reminded that I didn't introduce myself. I'm Dave Reepstein. I'm here at the Wharton School. I do want us to keep in mind that there is some good empirical evidence that says that, by a colleague of mine, Lynn Lodish, that says that 50% of advertising's impact happens in the long term, and it's much longer than 2 weeks and 4 weeks. And so I do think it's it'd be interesting to see whether or not that still holds in the new era of advertising.
We found that the effects over the course of the 2 weeks were about 50% larger. So perhaps in this case, they may be even longer if the effects do extend beyond 2 weeks.
Interestingly, there's also been a number of studies that show that most advertising does not work in the short run. And yet the issue is we still see people doing advertising. And it's got to be because the advertisers believe that there is some long-term effect. And in contrast to promotions where we see a short-term impact, this longer-term impact has got to play some particular role. And I recognize the noise that's in there, but it does become a major issue for us as we try to evaluate all this. So
I'd be curious to talk to you later about what you think are the best pieces of evidence on this. So that
it's easier to ask questions than to answer them, but I'll be glad to talk to you.
So 10 more minutes, next question.
So I have a question for Anuj, right here. Fascinating study. We haven't seen anything like that in academic research yet, so I'm sure you'll find a very good home for that paper. I was just curious to know a little more about the videos and some of the attributes of the videos that you guys put up. So for example, were they all professionally generated versus user generated? How long were they all similar in length for different products, focal versus coordinating products? And did you have data on, for example, whether people are actually viewing it, all of it, versus just information on whether a video was placed or not? Some of that. So if you can elaborate on some of those aspects, if you have them with you, that'd be great.
Yeah, good. Very good question, Nindya. So what we did was the firm produced these videos in-house, and typically they got some kind of local level models. All the videos are between 18 to 20 seconds long. Typically in a day, they shot something like 25 videos. So same model, or 2 or 3 different models, they will shoot something like 25 videos in a day with the same setting. So this is what we did it. So long as the heterogeneity in the videos are concerned, I mean to the extent possible, we try to confine it to as little as possible, apart from the products being displayed there. Okay. So far as the people viewing it, yes, we have the Google Analytics data. So we do not have consumer level data. But what we have is, say, for in a week's period, how many people have watched a particular video. We have introduced, I mean, like in the paper, we have introduced it, but the basic idea is here, some kind of a self-selection is going on. The moment I do it, there's a selection issue up there. So, and the results are very much similar, so the results don't change. So we did introduce it as how many people are viewing it. In fact, like what I did not present here was like, I also did a customer multi-purchase utility-based model, where I'm kind of doing from a customer level as to how customers' utility increases by viewing a video, and then take it to the data on an aggregate data on a BLP model, and I find similar results, and I'm really not surprised. Did I answer your questions?
Next question.
Yes, am I on? My name is Kara Marsh. I'm from Force Marsh Group, and I have a question about the add more ads. Can you speak to the extent to which you can extrapolate your findings to advertising that is not based on sales? So where you are doing advertising, issue-based advertising, trying to get people to do something or think a certain way about something, behavioral-based advertising, and can you extrapolate it?
So the right way to answer this question is we don't have a whole lot of good evidence other than a couple of additional proxies. So I'll give you 2 data points. One is we have run a lot of advertisements for using public service announcements instead of Yahoo search ads as the control ads. Generally, public service announcements performance has been abysmal. People just don't. Customers for our retailer are more interested in the retailer than they are in the Red Cross, for example. It's just sort of a characteristic of what seems like all public service announcements, that people just don't pay a whole lot of attention to them, so click-through rates are really low. Perhaps the issues that you're discussing are different in nature. So maybe looking at search outcomes might be more relevant. So what we have seen is that for many advertisers across a broad spectrum, we actually will see the types of, so I can't speak to anything about loyalty or income, but I can say with respect to at least the frequency effects, that it does look like that if people are noticing your ads, that showing more and more of these ads are going to get them to search more for the topics of interest. So we've seen this in things, mostly commercial things ranging from like cars to insurance to there's at least like TV shows. Like there's a pretty wide range of outcomes that we've looked at for a wide range of advertisers, and generally we see that showing more ads against. I think the right takeaway is you should identify the audience that you actually care the most about, and you should just show them a lot of ads rather than trying to cast too broad of a net where you think that the benefits from reaching some of those other people may be smaller in absolute terms.
I think we could squeeze in at least one more question before morning break.
Paul Ferris, University of Virginia, and my question is focusing on the short-term effects. How short-term are they? Do they occur within, for the online ads, are most of the purchases that you're measuring occurring within a very short time frame, or is it out to 2 weeks? And can you say something about the distribution of those and how much time you need to measure what you're going to eventually see?
So with respect to this particular campaign and many other campaigns we've run, generally we've looked at, the campaigns will last about a week or two, and we'll track sales over that week or two during the campaign. And frequently we'll be able to track them for at least 1 or 2 weeks after. Because of timelines, advertisers want results, so we have to then turn around an analysis, and so usually we can't wait an additional month or 2 or 3 or 4 for the more data to come back. So generally we're going to be capturing sales at least at most 1 week following the exposures.
I guess my question was, for the individual who receives an exposure, can you say something about how long it is going to be before they're likely going to react or not?
I was going to say, I think a lot of it depends on the industry. If you're talking about apparel, a lot of them are running sales on the weekend, and they want to know if the advertisements for that weekend sale generated sales in those 3 days. Whereas in the CPG space, we're looking out much longer. It also depends on the product purchase cycle.
I can speak just momentarily to the effects of display advertising on immediate responses. So when we get down to the second by second scale, we can actually show that there is a lift in search behavior during the 10 minutes immediately following exposure. And in some other papers that I've written, we see that, for example, with an automobile ad where you might expect the purchase cycle to be extremely long, we can see immediate effects both for the advertiser as well as for searching throughout the entire consumer space. So for example, with one ad that was for Acura, during the 10 minutes following exposure, we saw increases in searches not only for Acura but for essentially all car brands as people were thinking about the cars that they were most interested in. It was interesting to note that close competitors of Acura were actually experiencing the most statistically significant search lifts, as well as very large brands also experienced the largest magnitude lifts. So, some notes.
One final question in our last minute.
Is this on? Hi, I'm Jamie Evans from Anthropology. I had a question in terms of control groups. How do you account for other marketing channels influencing the advertising? So, for instance, if someone's part of your email distribution, how do you look at the incremental value of an ad on top of them also receiving an email versus somebody that's not getting that email or in paid search? Or how do you look at the channels?
There are two different issues that come up. One is, are you getting accurate, unbiased results? And there, for reasons that I specified earlier, given whatever else is happening, including these emails or whatever, the fact that you've randomized means that you're getting some people on the email list in the treatment group and some in the control group. And then, then there are going to be some people who are not on the email list or they're in treatment and some that are in control. So you're sort of getting the average effect of the ad campaign given everything else that's happening. The other interesting issue is, well, suppose people are already getting saturated with ads in other channels, and then we run this experiment on Yahoo. It's possible we won't find very much lift, but we would have if they'd gone dark on all their other advertising everywhere else, right? And we can't answer that with this particular experiment. We'd have to, convince the advertiser that it would be worth turning off all their other advertising just to see how well can they do on this channel whenever they try it.
It also is interesting to note that if you can observe who is getting the email versus who is not, you can use the experiment to then decompose the effect for those who receive the email versus those who do not, or those who were sent an email versus those who do not, or if you can observe whether they open the email or not. And that's actually really nice in that you can then see whether how valuable the email, you could potentially see how much less valuable the additional display advertising is as a result of, at least among the population that is shown the email.
I think it's time for our morning break. Thank you all for your questions. Please join me in thanking our panel.